Welcome back to another Ask Suspension special. We're here at Full Factory Suspension with Finn, and he's going to answer the rest of your questions about suspension. If you've got any more, don't forget, get them in the comments underneath. Use that hashtag Ask GMBN Tech. And let's roll straight in with the first one, who's from Stephen Daly. Finn, how do you get into tuning dampers and more other specialist aspects to suspension tuning? Do brands or other companies run training courses and things?
In short, yes they do. The best way to get into it, I think, is to start off in a shop, local store, mechanicking. You've got to have a fair amount of mechanical knowledge on general aspects of the bike first, I think. Then you can move into the damping sort of things. Actually, the biggest learning curve I had was when I started talking to car guys that knew what they were on about. So you want to look at the motorsport industry, you want to look at Formula One if you can get over there. I had a nice visit to Benetton, Williams Formula One back in the day, which really opened up my eyes to what suspension can do. So
there's a load of regular sort of ACT, SciTech, there's probably 20 different mechanic courses you can go on. Do they cover any aspects of suspension, or is that too specialist?
Basic maintenance on the suspension. They wouldn't cover tuning. That comes with a lot more experience. People like Fox, so the Fox distributor, will cover more in-depth stuff. Öhlins also do their own stuff. I think DT Swiss might, but I don't know for sure, but it's highly likely they would. And obviously the RockShox distributor as well. They have in-house technicians that are actually stunning, really good guys. They know what they're doing.
So start a factory floor at a bike shop basically, and then work your way.
Yeah, start a bike shop as a mechanic, and the nice thing about that is you'll get the reps will come round, and that'll give you access to that stage where you can go off and do training with the different guys. It's
cool actually. There's quite a lot of different career options within that. You know, bike shop mechanics to specialist stuff. Okay, next up is from Reese Daly. I've got a 2018 RockShox Yari RC. When you lift the front end of the bike up and the fork drops, it feels like it's got a little bit of top out, and it makes a quiet knocking sound. It's not noticeable when riding, only when moving the bike around the garage or picking it up. Is it bad? Does it need a service?
It's not bad. I don't think it's going to implode. There are a couple of things that could be wrong with it. Again, hard to tell without looking at it myself, taking it apart. The most obvious one is on the air side, there is a little top out bumper. It's really common for that to be completely upside down.
How?
I don't know, some of them just come through like that from the factory. On this Fox one, the top out pad, so basically this, as your fork extends, this goes up, boom, and just squishes a bit and gives it a bit of padding basically, so when it tops out. So if
you don't get that thunk.
Yeah, if you've got your rebound too fast, you've got that. And what they do occasionally in assembly with the RockShox one hasn't got these two cone faces, it's just completely flat on one side.
Okay.
And if you put that upside down, what happens is it sticks to the base plate.
Yeah, gotcha.
So you'll get that thunk, and then when it tries to break away, it's a bit of stiction to break away.
Yeah.
The other thing that can happen is over time these can get squished, which means then your port for your negative air has moved in relation to the piston when it's stationary. Okay. So there's a little bit of gap between the two now, and that can be sorted in the surface as well. Another possibility could be something loose in the cartridge, but I think that would be more apparent by you'd probably be losing oil, you'd probably be losing damping control, things like that.
Joe, this story reminds me of my first real set of suspension forks, a pair of RSTs with no damping. And when you used to do a bunny hop, it felt like the wheel was going to drop off basically because the top out was so extreme. So thank God for damping. Right, next up is from Echo Victor 81. How about the use of suspension oil as volume adjustment on forks and shocks? I've seen that before.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Again, probably more old school stuff, the older Mazzocchi stuff, older Mazzocchi forks, 888s. They use oil volume as part of the control for bottom out. So basically all you're doing is filling the fork up with enough oil so that the air pocket in the top, when it compresses up, that is your bottom out pad essentially, just using the air volume. yes, you can certainly do that.
I remember I did it a few times as well on older Fox forks, where I think they must have had a coil negative rather than
That's right.
an air negative.
Yeah.
So explain to people why you shouldn't do that with an air negative.
With a new
what the effects.
well, basically, yeah, the old one, if I show you this again, the old ones had, instead of having a negative air system, so this side of the air cartridge is positively charged, this side is charged positively, so there'll be 80 psi this side, 80 psi this side. And the way it gets there inside the fork is to transfer via a little port, which is just stamped into the side of the fork here. When you push down on the piston, it allows a little bit of air to seep through at a time, and then that charges this negative side, and that makes your fork nice and plush and smooth. The older Fox stuff, instead of having air in here, they use a spring, which is a much simpler way of doing it. And that means you can then put oil, a column of oil on top of the piston to control the ramp, in the same way that you would with your volume spacers on your negative.
That actually reminds me of another problem that's annoyingly common. So I don't know if this happens in manufacturing, you might know the answer to this. So I'm sure some of you out there have had a suspension fork that sucks down, and it always tends to be a big blob of grease on top of that piston, which I guess blocks the port or something like that internally, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'll block that internal port. Yeah.
How does it get there? Because it can happen on a set of forks that work perfectly well and then they suddenly just start packing down.
It's too much grease. I mean, I'll show you how we apply grease in the workshop. So this upper seal, take your fingerful, smear it round.
And that's sufficient.
That's enough grease to lubricate the seal. Basically what you're trying to do is make that seal, it's actually more for fitting it, because you want that seal to move dynamically in the fork, and when you're getting it into the narrow tube you can damage the seal. If it's greased, it's not going to damage it easily. But in the factories, when they're doing it really quickly, all they do is do that and then they put it in your fork, and then you end up with this kind of affair. And yeah, I've just wasted a load of grease, but it was to show you that's what they do in the factory. They dunk it in a bucket, they put it in your fork.
Well, I'm sure it doesn't happen all the time, but you do get them from time to time.
I think it happens a lot because they're just rushed. They're trying to produce as many models as they can, as quickly as they can. And at least they're doing it. In the past, it used to be that sometimes you
nothing in there,
apart and there'd be nothing in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then your fork just feel really sticky and harsh.
Well, there you go. That's how the transfer port works. That's how you can use air as oil, volume adjustment, and a bit about the grease and fork suck down as well. So that's kind of three things in one. Next up is from Calvin Hutton. This one's a bit more specific. How do you bleed the damping cartridge on shocks and forks? Do you have special tools, or have you got some clever methods?
There are a couple of methods.
I think you were bleeding one when we were here with you before.
Yes,
I remember getting a photo of you.
Yeah, I was hand bleeding a shot there. Yeah. There are a couple of methods. You have a vacuum bleeder, which are very efficient, very fast, allows the oil to flow into the ports and get all the air out. My preferred way, if I've got the time, is to hand bleed them manually. Depending on what system you've got, you need different tools for each one, and it's a different method for each one. So Fox generally are done upright, whereas the new RockShox stuff, you bleed them through the base plate.
Okay. Next one was actually directed to me. Doddy, can you find out what the coil shock Fin's using? Well, you can just tell us that on your Trek rail in the background, please.
Yep, it's essentially it's a Fox Vanilla RC. It's got a push-tuned piston, and it's also running a couple of Mazzocchi Bomber CR parts, because those two shocks, now that Fox own Mazzocchi, those two shocks share exactly the same parts. All the threads are the same, all the components are the same. So the nice thing is you can swap an older Fox unit over to metric sizing just by getting those parts from the Bomber CR.
Cool. That's given me an idea based on comments from a previous video I made as well. So I put a 150 fork and a coil shock on my reactor.
Yep.
My next project is to turn it into a short travel bike, but I've also thought, based on that initial video, it was a Fox DHX2 with an SLS spring, so an expensive shock.
Yep.
How cheap can you build a coil shock, do you think? Like, is it possible to have like a budget coil shock?
Yeah, I mean, those little Bomber CRs retail 350, 379-ish.
And then you need a spring on top of that?
On top of that, 50 quid. Or so second-hand one, you could probably get one for 20.
Next one's from Tim Sadler. Given Finn's thoughts on air shocks, what do you think about the use of tokens?
They have their place. My preferred, obviously, we've discussed this in the past, is a coil shock. Air shocks, they do work really well, and the modern stuff is fantastic. Tokens, yeah, we need them because we need to adjust the volume of the air inside the shock.
I know Tim, so Tim comments quite a lot.
Okay.
I feel like he was trying to prod you a bit then.
Oh, I hate air! No, I don't hate it. It's good, but in its place, yeah. For out-and-out performance coil, but air has its place, definitely.
Okay, so last question, and this is something that comes up quite a lot. I guess I'm going to add a bit to this. So from Richard, he says, I'm a larger rider, I weigh around 95 kilos, and I'm always struggling blowing through rear travel, even with the largest token in my shock.
Yeah.
How can I choose my next bike if I want to make sure it's got progressive linkage? Most brands aren't that forthcoming with those sort of figures, and I want to basically he wants to know how to do it.
Yeah, okay.
Is a short version.
Yeah.
So it's a large question. The whole question's on screen there for you to read.
Cool. The simplest way is obviously you have your rear wheel travel, which probably 160, 140, whatever. Then you have your stroke of your shock, which for a 160mm travel bike is normally around 2.5 or 275. So that'd be 63mm essentially as a 2.5. So you divide the stroke of the shock by the travel of the bike, and that gives you your ratio, which would be 2.54 on a 160 bike with a 2.5 stroke. I definitely haven't looked that up. And then yeah, so 2.5, most bikes are between 2.2 to 2.6. There are some that stray outside of that, some go up to 2.8. I believe some of the new propanes are up in the 2.8s. If you're a bigger guy, you probably want to maybe consider not getting one of those bikes. You might struggle for spring rate on those. If you can get down in the 2.2s, would be ideal for the bigger guy.
Interesting.
Because you can get a coil like 500, 600 pound, no problem. But when you're looking at sort of 800 pound, 700 pound springs, and again, you're going up in the pressure as well with your air shock, you're looking at probably 300 PSI for the higher leverage bikes, which isn't ideal for the shock.
Okay, so we've got the numbers, but what exactly do they mean, like with the higher number and the lower number?
If you're a bigger guy, you want a lower number basically. So somewhere in the 2.2, 2.3 would be really good, because then you can have a lower spring rate or a lower air pressure in your shock.
No, and so the thing I was going to add on to this, we get this question loads with heavier riders, is about max pressure in shocks.
Yeah.
The manufacturers will always list a max pressure, let's say it's 250 on a particular shock.
Yeah.
Can they actually go over that? This isn't to say you should do this, is not advice, but what's going to happen basically if they needed to do that?
In theory, yeah, of course you can. The problem being is if you think about when your shock compresses, you might have 250 PSI when it's extended.
Yeah.
But if you compress that shock right down, you could be 1,000 PSI. So that shock will be rated for a maximum pressure, which they don't tend to talk about.
No, they just talk about the input pressure, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I've not looked into depth into it, but I would imagine it's somewhere in the region of 800 to 1,000 PSI.
So there's got to be a lot of riders out there that are heavier than
Yeah.
what the maximum shock weight is. And okay, so let's just say, for argument's sake, that the rider is too heavy for the shock.
Yeah.
What options might they have to get a shock that would be okay for their body weight?
Some of you are going to hate me, but I'm going to say go for a coil.
I thought that was coming.
You can get custom wound springs for coil, but again, then you have the issue where is the shock robust enough to put
To
up
withstand
that spring?
that, yeah.
If you look at the plates on the end of a shock, it's an open circlet basically.
Yeah.
So it's not completely sealed off. So what can happen is that can twist and basically snap off.
Yeah, and I guess you've got adjusters and stuff at the end there that could get damaged.
Something like the newer Fox DHX actually has a clip built into it which aims to sort of fight that. That's your spring clip, that sits on the shock like that, and then in between that and the spring you have this additional ring.
Oh, okay.
Basically,
Yeah.
and that is there purely. Well, it serves two purposes, but the main purpose of it is to stop that base plate from basically bending.
Yeah, that makes total sense in that. Yeah.
And the other purpose is also a friction thing.
Of course. So it's like a washer essentially, isn't it?
When a shot goes through its travel,
it's going to rotate slightly, isn't it? Yeah. Cool. There you go. So hopefully there's some good information in there for all you suspension techers out there. Any more questions, get them in those comments underneath. Finn's website's going to be in the description underneath as well. So if you want to get in touch with him about any stuff, fire away and we'll see you on the next show. See you later.